Hello, my name's Leah Sarter, and I'm so excited because today I'm starting a series on the Torah. This is the first video of it, and the Torah are the first 5 books of the Bible. I know a lot of people are intimidated and kind of scared to read the Torah and the Old Testament in general, but the truth is that there is so much depth, and it is really beautiful, and there is so much to learn. And so I know this is a short video, but I hope it encourages you, and I hope it challenges you to really open it up and read it for yourself, because there is so much to go through. So I'm going to start today in the first book in Genesis, all the way at the beginning in Genesis 1:1, where God creates the heavens and the earth. And in verse 27, God creates mankind, male and female, Adam and Eve, in his image. God created humankind so that we could have a relationship with him. He created us so we could partner with him. God created us so that we could live in harmony with the Creator. But we have an enemy, and Satan's goal is to kill, steal, and destroy. His goal is to do that, and so Satan deceived Adam and Eve, and they sinned. And at that moment, sin entered the world. Sin entered the world, and at this point, we're in the scene, and there's the tree of good and evil in the garden, and that is where Adam and Eve ate from. And that tree represents a choice that we still have today. To trust God's knowledge of good and evil, or to try to choose what good and evil is by our own selves, by our own knowledge, by our own minds. You see, since the beginning, we've had a choice to follow God's will and way, or to follow our own. In chapter 6, we are told that God saw how great the wickedness was in the human race, and his heart was deeply troubled. God saw the sin. He saw all these people choosing sin, choosing to destroy their lives with it, and he saw the corruption, and he saw it crushing them. And so God decides to send a flood. God decides to send a flood to wipe out everything except Noah's family and 2 of every kind of animal. God decides to send the flood because he was so sad at the sin in the world. He was so sad. And I tell you this because God is still the same yesterday, today, and forever. And God is still sad at the sin that he sees in the world. But when we sin, God is less angry at us and more angry with the sin that separates us from him. God is so sad, and he's angry at the sin that separates us from him. He isn't angry at you. Later on, we meet a man named Abram, who will later be called Abraham. And throughout all of Genesis, God tests him and he challenges him, and he also promises to bless Abraham's offspring. In chapter 12, God speaks to Abraham, and he asks him to leave your family, leave your hometown, and go wherever I lead you. And so Abraham does that. He leaves his town, and he takes his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot, and they go, and God leads them to Egypt. And in chapter 14, Lot is captured by the Sodomites, and he's taken prison as a prisoner. And Abraham thinks quickly, he responds, and he acts, and he rescues Lot. If in the midst of this, in all of this, God promises to give Abraham a son. Throughout all of this as that is happening, at age 75, God speaks to Abraham and promises to give him a son. But God does not fulfill that. He doesn't fulfill that promise until Abraham was actually 100. Could you guys believe that? Could you guys believe and just imagine waiting for 25 years? Waiting 25 years for God to fulfill his promise, and just being in that season of waiting. That would be really, really hard. But Abraham does that. He waits. And so in chapter 21, Sarah does give birth to Abraham's son, Isaac. And you might think, okay, everything's got to be perfect now, right? So Abraham's waited for a while. God fulfills the promise. Happily ever after, right? That's going to happen. Not quite. If you keep reading, God speaks to Abraham again. And God says, Abraham, take your son. Yes, your only son. Yeah, the son you love so much, Isaac, and sacrifice him. Go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. Man, could you guys just believe this? Could you guys just imagine being this? Being in this story. Imagine being Abraham and hearing God say this to you. Just imagine God giving you something, God blessing you with something that you've prayed for, you've waited for, you've anticipated, you've expected, and then you get it and you expect it to all be perfect, and God says, now sacrifice it. Let it die. Let it go away. Let it be mine. Could you guys just imagine being there? I'm not sure if you guys know this, but it was a 50-mile journey for Abraham and Isaac to go from their home to the region of Moriah. If I was Abraham on that 50-mile journey, I would just be contemplating the whole time. I would be, am I sure that was even God speaking? Because that sounds crazy. I'm not really sure if I could do that. And on that journey, I would be so conflicted. I would be thinking, well, do I serve the God I love, the God I know, but let my heart be so deeply troubled to lose my son and so sad and heartbroken? Or do I disobey the God I love? I would just be so confused. But in verse 3 we read that Abraham does obey. He obeys God. And most of you guys know the end of the story. You know that Abraham goes up to the mountain, ties Isaac up, is ready to sacrifice him, and then God calls out from heaven and says no, and provides a ram for them to sacrifice. This is a beautiful story, and it's actually a foreshadowing of the sacrifice of Jesus. God sent his son. Yes, his only son. Yes, the son he so loved, Jesus, so that we could be reconciled with God, so that we could make peace with God, and so that we could have eternal life with him. This story, Isaac was spared. Isaac was spared because the ram came, but Jesus couldn't have been spared because we know that the penalty of sin is death. The wages of sin is death. So Jesus died on the cross for us. Jesus died on the cross for us so that we could make peace with God. Throughout Genesis, there's just test after test where Abraham is challenged, but he undividedly follows and obeys and does what God says. He obeys God. And Abraham's story is a really beautiful reminder, and I want to remind you this today. Never let time make you doubt what God says and what God said. Never let time make you doubt what God says, because he is still the same and he is incredibly faithful. If we continue, we learn about Abraham's offspring. We learn about his family, and they're actually really broken, and it's quite a mess. Jacob deceives his father Isaac, and he steals his brother Esau's birthright, and then Jacob later marries 4 women, and there's favoritism, and that's a whole mess, and that creates division. And then Laban enters the scene, and he manipulates Jacob for his own financial gain, and it is a mess. And The truth is that the lying and the stealing and the deception in Abraham's family kills and destroys, just like the sin in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. At this point in the Bible, there's just story after story of people choosing evil, but God turns it into good. There's a story of people choosing sin, choosing their own way, choosing based off of their own knowledge, but God turns it into good. That is who He is. He's still in the same business today. He's still in the same business of working miracles. Lastly, Genesis ends with the well-known story of Joseph. I love the story of Joseph. Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. He ends up in prison, but chapter 39 says God was with him. So God raises up Joseph, and Joseph becomes second in command in Egypt, and he saves all of Egypt and his family from a famine. I love the story of Joseph, and I want to share with you guys my favorite part. I love that it wasn't until Joseph was 30 years old that he became second in command in Egypt. Joseph was in prison for 10 years. 10 years before he had that platform, before he was second in command. I think sometimes maybe there's some own seasons in our life that might look like a prison per se. Maybe it's that season of waiting. Maybe it's that season where you are serving without any recognition, without any platform. It's that season where you are praising, you are prophesying, you are praising before your breakthrough. It's that season of preparation. But we can learn from Joseph that Joseph does not waste his season of waiting. In fact, Genesis 39:23 says that in the seasons where Joseph was serving and Joseph was in prison, the people around Joseph saw that the Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Wherever he was, whatever he was doing, people saw that the Lord was with him. How he acted wasn't based off of his circumstances. It wasn't how his circumstance looked, but it was from the God he served. We know that once Joseph did gain the platform, his life was a testimony that God does live and God does speak. Joseph didn't waste his season of waiting. In fact, he let his heart heal during that time. And he let his love for God and for people, for his brothers, even the brothers that hurt him and sold him into slavery, he let his heart heal in that season. I hope that this video encouraged you. I hope it brought some light to your day. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the following videos that I'm doing in this series. I love you guys so much, and you are so special.